Hello, thank you for joining another TeamSense Tuesday webinar. My name's Caroline, and I'm joined by Justin, and we're talking about employee engagement and specifically how to tackle the big rocks and turn data into action. But before we introduce ourselves, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items really quick. So as always, questions are encouraged throughout the webinar. We just ask that you ask them in that Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. Also, we are recording this webinar, as you probably heard from the beginning. So we will be sure to share that recording via email to everyone who's registered. We usually try to get that out by the end of the day, so feel free to keep an eye out for that. But without further ado, let's hop into it and introduce ourselves. So my name's Caroline Rizzo. I'm a marketing manager over at TeamSense, and I kind of split my brain in half. I've worked on HR teams before and have developed some employee engagement surveys, so I like to think I have a little bit of seasoned experience, but really we'll be talking more through my marketing half of my brain today. But love to introduce Justin if you'd like to talk a little bit about yourself as well.
Yeah, of course. And first of all, some of you might be joining, hoping to see Sheila Stafford, our co-founder and CEO. Sheila asked for forgiveness. She was invited by a major manufacturing customer of ours to tour a plant, so she's never one to turn that down. So she sends her apologies. And now you're probably wondering, okay, we probably have an HR audience. What do these two marketing people know about HR, and what do they have to share with me? So my background is in marketing, enterprise software, workflow management, and I've served many HR customers, automating their HR business processes. But really, we're going to talk about marketing, and we're going to try and share with you today as HR leaders or even operations leaders, tricks you can use from marketing to help your employee engagement programs. So we asked the question up front, why are employee engagement programs like marketing campaigns? As two people who are marketers who've worked closely with HR teams, hopefully we have something to offer. Now, that's where the question and answer in your meeting console will be very useful here. So if there's questions that you have about marketing or questions, what are you talking about this HR thing? You don't know what you're talking about. Put them in there, and we'll face the music towards the end of the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, of course, we're here as marketing managers and leaders, and we have a lot of experience in this world. We just felt like a lot of our learnings were really applicable to HR teams and how managers can just do a lot more with taking a lot of these big rocks and kind of, again, turning them into marketing campaigns as we like to think through them. But let's talk a little bit more about like the why this is so important, right? So a few weeks back, Sheila, again, our co-founder and CEO of TeamSense, who has extensive experience in the manufacturing logistic industry. Her and Justin kind of talked through a lot around some of the big data out there around manufacturing. Frankly, we are seeing that we have a very tight labor market. Justin, do you want to kind of talk through a little bit of a high level of kind of what you'll discuss in that webinar a few weeks back, just so we can kind of set the stage here?
Yeah, and for our super fans on the webinar, you might have seen this when Sheila and I went over it, but the question is why is employee engagement so important? And I think this sums it up in two pictures. On the left side, you see a lot of manufacturing construction going on right now, so new productivity is about to come online. On the right-hand side, you see a shortage of talent in manufacturing. And so what do you get when you have more demand for skilled manufacturing labor and a shrinking and scarce supply? You have to focus on employee engagement. You have to focus on creating buzz amongst your employees about what a great place it is to work at, and keeping them with you, because it's going to be hard to go out and find new talent, as these two graphs show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of ties into, again, why it really matters and some of the stats that you're looking at here, if you want to talk through some of these points.
Yeah, specifically. So, whatever kind of company you've worked for, you felt engaged or disengaged probably at some jobs. And so, but focusing specifically on manufacturing, we know that engaged employees are more productive. And this stat says 70% higher. I would believe that. if you've been in a place where employees aren't engaged, you can sort of feel the non-productivity or the low productivity. And if you walk into a shop or a plant where there's high engagement, you can see that engagement turning into productivity. Also safety. So disengaged employees, people have sort of checked out. They're not paying attention quite so well to themselves or to their colleagues. And so you see more accidents as a result of disengagement. Quality, going to the bottom left, companies with high employee engagement scores experience 40% fewer quality defects. So these are tangible impacts of something that's sometimes seen as a little bit intangible, which is employee engagement, but they show that engagement or disengagement shows up in productivity, safety, quality. And of course, we've mentioned retention. In a 2023 online survey, I looked for a 2024 online survey. They're not out yet. It's a little bit too early in the year. But 2023, 56% said that they plan to leave their current job sometime in 2023. That was amongst manufacturing employees in a study done by Industry Week. And so has that feeling gone away? Probably not. There's folks out there who, if they're not engaged in their job, they know that slide I just showed, they know that there's going to be more jobs out there and they're starting to look around. That means that everybody needs to be on their best behavior and think about what they're going to do to engage those employees.
Yeah, I mean, if I was an HR manager looking at that statistic, that would give me heartburn. Especially, I would just have sleepless nights over that because in terms of looking at that chart that we looked at the prior slide, you can see obviously plants are just growing and growing and growing in manufacturing. There's always going to be other options to look elsewhere, especially if your situation is even remotely unpleasant. If there's going to be the opportunity out there, why not hop? It's an easy hop, right? So I feel that.
And to draw another connection to marketing, I would think of that as customer attrition. You know, if I'm a marketer and I know that one of my competitors is losing customers, those are the first people I want to talk to because they understand the space.
Right.
Those are the folks I want to talk to. So same thing, your employees. I was on a tour with a customer in Houston, and their HR leader was telling us about how many manufacturers were in the neighborhood and how it was quite easy for skilled employees to just walk out and go get another job. And she took that as her responsibility to make sure that that didn't happen. And luckily, she was using TeamSense as a tool in her tool belt to keep that attrition from happening.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. So let's kind of jump a little bit more into, again, why us two marketers are here and how these things really tie together. Let's talk, again, kind of just jumping into more of the overarching ways that we can kind of connect, really getting employee engagement feedback and how we actually tie these to marketing campaigns. You want to kind of expand upon that a little bit more?
Yeah, so the chyrons or the arrows at the top of the screen are things one does in marketing to run a successful marketing program. And we've just paralleled it with the things below that are what one needs to do to run a successful employee engagement program. So HR leaders, site leaders that want to be strategic about how they're going to engage their employees. It's not just about throwing pizza on the table on Tuesday or some other activity. Your employees might appreciate that, but they're not going to see it as part of a big picture, as part of a program, as part of something that you're doing all the time to make sure that your employees are engaged, safe, happy, excited to come to work. And so if we compare that to the process that Caroline and I and our teams go through on the marketing side, first of all, you need market research, and that starts with voice of customer. You need to know what your employees want. And it's easy, even if we're experts in our own domain, it's really easy to think that we know without asking people. And many a failed marketing campaign has gone there. Same thing for employee engagement programs. So ask for feedback. You can do that with annual surveys, pulse surveys, focus groups. There's lots of ways to ask for that feedback, but you have to think about your audience. And are those ways that you're going out and gathering feedback from employees easy for your employees to do? And maybe just as important on the back end, are you going to be able to digest all the feedback you get? It creates sort of a double-edged sword because you want the feedback from your employees so you can provide better engagement programs. But the more feedback you get, you're thinking, oh my goodness, we're going to have to sort this, tabulate it, collate it, and figure out what's going on. Carolyn, do you have any experience in that area?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about that, how I've done employee surveys in the past. But again, I worked in technical spaces, right? You and I both have experience in software tech. So we're asking these surveys via a Google form or something where we're collecting that data pretty much really in a way that ties into a really nicely tied up spreadsheet where we can pull that data and do a pivot table and make some reports. But I actually kind of asked you this question a few days ago, right? Where how are manufacturing HR managers, how are they really asking for this feedback? And we'll also kind of jump into more of, some templates that we have, but it does seem like it is a very manual process, right? You're having these surveys that are sticking in a box in a break room, or they have someone going around with a clipboard, right? So it's a very manual process, which I just can't even imagine from the back end trying to sift through that data and then make decisions.
Or you're going at meetings before a shift starts, and if you're at a facility with 3 shifts, that's 3 meetings times multiple locations, and just the effort to gather that feedback can be pretty daunting. And so, for example, we heard from one of our customers that is now using TeamSense to gather feedback in their annual employee survey, that the year prior, because it was so hard to get the information out and get it back from employees, they had a 7 or 8% response rate to their annual employee engagement survey. And with TeamSense, because it reduced the effort to connect with their employees, they got a response rate of around 80% the year after when they were using TeamSense. So sometimes those things seem insurmountable because we're used to doing it a certain way, but there are ways to gather that information a little bit more efficiently, and that means you can get more feedback. Now, that brings us to our second one. Suppose you've been very successful and you get lots of great ideas from your team about what you can do to make their employee experience better at your site. You have to prioritize. You have to let some things go because, as the saying goes, you can't boil the ocean. And especially when people's feelings and livelihood is on the line, you have to be very careful about prioritizing. So you're picking the things where you can win.
Right. And we'll have some tactics on how to do that. Pretty much this whole entire slide here, if you think about it, is a mental map for really the rest of our presentation and kind of how we'll jump into each of these pieces. But absolutely, I think it's one thing to ask questions. We never want to be in a position where we're just asking questions to ask questions, right? Sometimes it can feel like, oh, check that box and I sent the survey out and I'm done, wipe my hands of it. But there's nothing more frustrating than actually not feeling like your feedback was being addressed. So it's so critical that we do identify the big rocks and really help break it down a little bit further.
And we work with so many HR teams at major manufacturing and logistics companies, and they work really hard and they have great ideas. We see that pretty often, though, the failure to prioritize, and the second Chiron here, prioritizing all that great feedback. If people tell you they want 20 things, you don't need to do all 20 things in the first quarter. And if you try, it's going to be hard to execute and people aren't going to realize what's going on. And so also identifying your target audiences and articulating benefits for those audiences. So you've taken the feedback and you say, we want to do something to help the entire group of employees, but maybe certain employees or certain groups within your organization are more vocal or are connectors and can help promote your program better. Focus on them and think about what's in the program for that audience, and that'll help you with the messaging and positioning. So when you get to the next step, which is actually creating the campaign, You need to start thinking about scheduling, channels. How are you going to get the information out? And this is where I want you to speak to this, Caroline, because this is something you're doing right now for TeamSense.
Right, exactly. So a lot of what we're working towards is actually editorializing it. Think of it as your own personal editorial calendar, where you have goals that are set. Maybe it's a monthly cadence, maybe it's a quarterly cadence, but it's always thinking 10 steps ahead. As a good example, I like to think about open enrollment, right? Open enrollment for a lot of companies comes in October. But what can we do to start thinking about it actually even earlier so that it's not hit like a surprise? You want to start building that awareness early on. It's kind of what we do in marketing too. It's a lot of building awareness and then creating action steps and then hopefully closing a deal. In this case, the deal would be getting people to successfully have a really good open enrollment period. So again, we'll kind of jump more into that too when we get into that section, but I like giving that little preview too.
Yeah, when people think about marketing or people think about HR programs or engagement programs, they tend to think about promotion. How did I hear about it? How did I know to get involved? And there's promoting the thing you're doing, but this is tying back to that first step. You asked your employees what they wanted, and the challenge where we see a lot of HR teams fall down is they deliver these great programs to deliver what their employees asked for. And then they fall down at the last step. They don't tie back and say, hey, you asked for clear information to sign up for benefits during the open enrollment period. That they might have delivered that, but you need to take that last step and tell your team, hey, you asked for this, we did it, here's what it looked like. Because you want to close that loop. You want people to feel like they're listening, you're listening to them, and that you're being transparent and you're delivering. If you deliver what they asked for, make sure they know that you did that.
Yeah. Maybe just get a little bit more credit for your work, brag about it a little bit. It actually helps more than you would think, especially just making your employees feel like they really were heard and that you have taken actionable steps and you've communicated those actionable steps. We'll talk more a little bit too about just how critical communication is and really how it's the foundation of really building out this whole entire program. But first, if you're ready, Justin, I think we can kind of move on to
Let's do that. Let's go into a little more detail on each.
Yeah, let's deep dive into each of them. So obviously, what always comes first is actually asking for that feedback, right? Some of y'all may have a system already in place for this. Maybe you do annual surveys like we talked about one of our customers does, but they're also considering doing them a little bit more frequently. The good news here is in case you are maybe at ground zero and you're kind of just maybe getting started building out surveys or asking for feedback, or maybe you have a really great process in place, but it's always good to do a refresh or maybe kind of just see what else is out there. The good news is that we have some really great templates actually on our resources page at teamsense.com. You can take a look at an example of an employee engagement and satisfaction survey that you can download and actually use yourself. So if you want to take a look at that, feel free. But I think Justin will talk a little bit through what some of those questions actually look like. We couldn't include all of them on here, obviously, because it's a big survey. But feel free to kind of chat through some of these.
Yeah, and this was just a sample from that document that Caroline just showed. And of course, every team needs to modify these for their local circumstances. But the type of survey could be about job satisfaction, focusing on the job, maybe ranking on a scale of 1 to 5. I feel valued at work. I'm satisfied with my current compensation and benefits, questions like that. That structured data is good for prioritization, and it'll tell you where you're particularly strong as an organization and where you might need to improve. Same type of questions about company satisfaction. Are there opportunities to grow within the organization? I'm inspired to grow within the organization. You ask questions about management and how responsive employees feel that management is. So those are the structured kind of comparative type of questions, ranking on a scale. It's also important to combine open-ended questions that'll give you a little more granular detail or even anecdotes about some of the larger themes that you might ask about in those structured surveys. And we actually use this in TeamSense. if folks are on the call that that are TeamSense users, you know that our surveys have the ability to do both structured and open questions, such as how can we improve your work environment? What practices do we need to change? How can management improve at our organization? Having both structured and open-ended gives you a much clearer picture of where your employees want you to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are great examples. And again, if you want to take a look at that template, it's there as a free resource to you. Just go to our website under the resource section and you'll see it. Um, Next up is obviously identifying the big rocks, right? This is our positioning and messaging section if we're going back to our marketing brain here. I know, Justin, you have some really great exercises that you've used and your experience with this, and we'll kind of jump into that and then tie it back again to some examples that we'll use, but would love to get kind of your overview of these exercise, programs that have been helpful for you in the past.
Yeah, and I put it out here in gory detail. I won't go through all of this, but suppose you send out a survey or you gather that feedback from employees. The hardest part is grouping that feedback into themes, because remember, you need to deliver the programs in a thematic way so your employees can follow and understand them. And so one exercise is a card sorting exercise that I've used in software product management, and figuring out, okay, we could do lots of features in this software. How do we figure out which are most important and how to group those features to think about and deliver? Same thing for an employee engagement program. So you can write, let's suppose you do that survey or you gather information and you come up with 10 ideas that your employees are asking for. Then you can pick some individuals that are maybe indicative of a range of people in your site, and you bring each of them in and you have those 10 ideas on cards, and you ask them to group those cards in some way and to speak to you while they're grouping them. That will give you a sense of how employees are thinking about the relationships between those activities or those programs. And then at the end, you ask them to say, okay, group A over there, where does that rank compared to group B and group C? And you get some rankings. So you're getting a sense of relationship and also priority from the employees. Now, of course, you can't do this with everybody. So you do have to pick a subset of your employees to get a range of view on that. The one to the right is a bubble sort method. So it's the same thing. You have 10 cards, but they're face down, of the 10 things that you might do for your employee engagement programs. Bring somebody into the room, you flip the first one over, you ask them to explain whether that's important, urgent, what they think about it. Then you flip the second card over and you ask the same thing. Would this be useful? Now tell me, is number 2 more important than number 1? And you ask them to stack rank based on impact that they feel that program or that activity would deliver. And you go through those 10 cards so that you end, say, card number 3, you bring that one, flip it over, and then you compare it to card number 1. Is this more or less important than card number 1? Oh, it's less important. Okay, so I'm putting it under card number, now card number 2, is it more or less? You get the picture, but basically you end with a prioritization then of the 10 activities you might do. And that'll help you figure out, back to this idea of not boiling the ocean, it'll help you figure out what those 3 big rocks are going to be so you don't wear yourself out trying to do too many things and show impact.
Yeah, that's 100% the key here is obviously let's not boil the ocean. Let's really boil it down to just a few things that we can really focus in on. So that kind of transitions us nicely. We wanted to actually give an example framework of a way to think about this. So um, when we take a look at some emerging big rots, let's say that you got your survey results back or taking a look at the data, you're seeing that maybe there's some themes that are emerging in which you need to maybe apply a little bit more attention to based on the feedback that was received. Let's just have our pretend company here. And let's say that, man, our results came back and there's kind of a clear path that we need to focus really in on manager effectiveness, maybe career growth and employee communication. Maybe we've gotten feedback that, hey, I'm having some feelings about my manager and really kind of how I work with them and how I respect them, maybe. Let's talk about that. Career growth. Again, sometimes people ask questions around, do you feel like your career trajectory is one that's heading in a positive upward direction at this business? Maybe you've gotten maybe feedback that that's not the case. Employee communication. Maybe people are frustrated with having to call off to work, and it's just such a annoying bottleneck in terms of when they have to call off when something's wrong or they're sick. So maybe that's another thing to take a look at. So let's say that these are the three emerging big rocks, right? What I really encourage your team to do is actually get with an HR team. And this is where that bubble exercise or that card exercise actually really applies really well. Get together, you can kind of brainstorm some different ideas within each of these big rocks. Let's say under manager effectiveness, maybe we need to implement more leadership training. Maybe we need to set clearer KPIs. Maybe we want to introduce manager employee one-on-ones, right? Maybe we've seen that if an employee and a manager have maybe a more one-to-one relationship, then there's more trust there. There's a more sense of growth there as well, which could tie to career growth. Um, Within the career growth section, again, some things around mentorship and coaching opportunities. Maybe we have budget for tuition assistance. That would be amazing. And then if I were to jump into kind of employee and communication, same thing where we talked about maybe we need to take a look at our communication channels. What are we doing today? What can we do to maybe improve it? Do we have bulletin boards? Maybe we should think about utilizing something more like an SMS system versus a call off, right? Um, or, think about it this way, multilingual support too. Maybe we feel like there's a language barrier and there's a breakdown in communication because of that. So other things to consider, obviously, depending on where your manufacturing plant is in the company or in the country, that obviously has implications with language barriers, of course. I'm not sure if you have any other tidbits you wanted to add to this, Justin, too.
I just wanted to mention that these are not theoretical or hypothetical. Like I look at established rituals for connection, and one of our customers did this. They communicated with their employees and they asked, hey, what would help you feel more engaged on the plant floor? And they came up with a program to let the employees pick between 3 Pandora playlists and choose the music that they got to listen to while they were working every week. Now that seems like a small thing, but again, connecting that loop back, asking employees what would make them feel more engaged at work, what would inspire that engagement, and then doing it, and then making it easy for them to pick the music that they want to listen to, and then delivering it like clockwork every week. It doesn't need to be a huge multi-month effort. A lot of times the best ways to meet some of these objectives, it could be relatively simple, but because you're looking at so many things that you want to do, you can't see the simple things or the quick wins that might be mixed amongst all the bigger type programs.
Yes, us marketers love our low-hanging fruit. I would say another analogy to consider too, again, we talked about the fact that manager effectiveness, career growth, employee communication, those are kind of your big rocks. These are where we're kind of getting more into like a stone throw level. I like to actually think of these as almost OKRs if you have objectives and key results too. So that's kind of another thing to think of it. A lot of depends on the team. Some teams are really into OKRs. Some are really into KPIs, key performance indicators. You can kind of think about it in that way as well. So, here's an example of one. Our objective, our O, would be to really improve employee communication, right? That's something that we need to work on. So a key result to that would be we're going to update our communication channels to meet the needs of our employees. That would be a key result, right? So another just framework to think about it that way too, in case rocks and stones, there's different ways that you can kind of imagine it. But kind of if we take a look at the next step, so obviously these are a lot of different things, and I'm sure it's still feeling pretty big rocky to some people. So the next step would be, okay, depending on maybe if you did that bubble exercise or that card exercise, you got together with your internal key stakeholders and you kind of made some decisions based on where you want to focus. Because the other thing to consider too is what are your business needs, right? What's actually realistic for your company in terms of what you can accomplish? So let's say you pick maybe 4 things. Maybe that's the reality of kind of what we're working with here. And you said, okay, I think these are probably the 4 most important things that we can do based on the feedback we've gotten and based on what our company can actually do today. So it's important to kind of highlight these things with your team and then really start getting a better sense around how do you actually create some reality around this. So this is where we'll kind of jump into next, where let's actually build our program. Like, and again, back to marketing brain here. Let's think about what our campaign is, how we actually create these campaigns. So I'm going to jump into it if you're cool with that, Justin.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
I'm just moving along because I'm really excited about this clearly. But what's really helpful is actually putting some time framing around your objectives and then your key results that you picked, right? Your big rocks, but then also your stones. Again, keep in mind that we kind of picked from each category because we want to still address those big 3 rocks. But maybe, for example, you can see that maybe employee communication has a couple more. Maybe one, for example, establishing rituals for connection is kind of like a low-hanging fruit, a quick win, whereas the communication channel may be a bigger lift, right? So what you want to think about is how do we break this up maybe into quarters? That's kind of a really healthy starting point, I think, in terms of thinking through how to accomplish these things. Because you may have a HR team of 2, maybe you have a team of 15. I don't know based on kind of your company, but you really want to assess the time frame based on what you think will be actually manageable for your team. So as an example, let's say based on feedback that we've gotten from tons of customers, honestly, establishing a communication channel is the fundamental need of your business. Without that communication channel, all of this other stuff is just, it's nice, but it's more difficult unless you have that communication channel established. So let's say that's like Q1 priority. Let's like really jump into that and establish that. Um, then let's say maybe Q2 is what we want to focus in on. How do we establish maybe a manager employee one-on-one program? What does that look like? Are they going to maybe meet monthly, weekly? Is it a check-in? Maybe we can create a template for them to have a conversation back and forth. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy. Maybe it's 15 minutes. Maybe it's an hour, right? So kind of building out that program. And that's something you would maybe target for Q2. And then let's move into Q3. Let's think about how we want to stand up our tuition assistance program. Maybe we found some local places where people can actually go back to school and get some training. Maybe we let them just kind of decide on their own and provide them the stipend. There's a lot of different options with that. And then let's say we jump to Q4 and establish rituals for connection. We talked about that easy Pandora playlist, but maybe there's some other traditions and rituals you want to establish. Sometimes people like to think about these things around the holidays. Who knows? Kind of a good way to tie into the new year. But that's really key, is actually creating a really nice framework that's actually manageable in a calendar sense. I'm sure you have experience with this too, Justin, in terms of building out marketing programs and how we kind of think through things in an editorial calendar.
Yeah, and I would say 2 things, and I love the way of thinking about it chronologically, like you laid out here, Caroline. Think about what you're going to do first that's going to make things easier next. So great example here, utilizing multiple communication channels. Once you have that set up in Q1, the promotion of those manager employee one-on-ones in Q2, or education or documentation about how to do that, it's going to be much easier to deliver. So it makes these things ladder one on to the other. The other thing is that even within that communication activity, what we see at TeamSense is many of our customers use us to communicate from employee into the company on call off. Hey, I can't come to work today, making that communication easier. But then that enables other types of communication for the HR team. For example, one of our customers noticed that they were getting a lot of call off communication at a certain day of the week and a certain time of day. And they looked at the data that was stored in TeamSense and they realized, okay, this has to do with problems getting to work, either because of car trouble or weather. And they used that insight to create a carpool program for their site that had made it easier for their team members to get to work. And then they were able to communicate the existence of that program and put the schedule up on their employee portal, things like that. So communication goes both ways. And what we see with our customers, once they start communicating about something and making that communication easy, it opens up all sorts of other communications that they would like to do that maybe they weren't even considering before because it was so hard to communicate. Once it becomes easy, you get a lot more things that you can do as an HR team.
Yeah, absolutely. It just helps move the needle. And it's almost like you have this magic power now that you didn't have before, and you can really reach employees where they're at. Um, Obviously, there's physical ways to communicate with them, whether that's in the break room with your clipboard, but think of just how much easier it is to give them something that's literally at their fingertips. A lot of the times, some of these people just don't even want to talk to a person, right? So that really breaks us out to where you're kind of giving them the power to work with you and communicate with you back in a way that's super efficient for them, but also majorly efficient for you in terms of collecting data. So I think that's a really good point. So obviously we're moving along here. I know Justin and I could talk about this for hours, but I think the key thing is, I think this is just so important, is tying your program back to the voice of the customer. So kind of what we talked about earlier is, how do you actually make sure that you're communicating out, tying it back to, hey, when we actually ask these questions in a survey, this is what we're addressing, and potentially even showing the results of this. So again, I like to think of things in frames of a timeline. I love beautiful timelines that break things down into quarters just to kind of help my brain. And something also to consider too is that, again, we're breaking this down in quarters as just an example, but you can even think about it monthly, right? So there's different ways to think through this. You could even say within Q1, within this particular month is when we're going to accomplish that. It's kind of whatever you want to do, but we're just trying to make it less intimidating. So obviously what's key is really establishing your communication plan. So let's say in Q1, again, you're going to update your communication channels. Here's a great example. What if you implemented TeamSense, right? That would be a really great way to update your communication channel, not to plug it in. I am a marketer, so I have every right to say this, right, in this webinar. I'm kidding. But what I would say here is, okay, you want to, at the beginning of the quarter, say, hey, based on the feedback that we've received from the survey that you took, we acknowledge that there is a need for better employee communication. So we are updating our communication channel by doing XYZ thing. It's tying back to that objective is what we're doing, and here's the key result. This is what we're doing to improve it. This is when you can expect it to be implemented. Just having very clear communication. And the benefit is that the way that you can communicate it is very easily, again, through TeamSense when you communicate it out. Same deal with Q2. Let's say beginning of the quarter, hey, based on the results we got from the year-end survey, we feel like there is a need for more employee and management communication, maybe on a one-on-one basis. So in order to improve that, we're going to establish this program where you're going to meet monthly, exactly kind of communicating and tying back again to that big rock or that objective, right? And so I don't have to go through the rest of the year, but you can see how the communication tactic is just as important. So which is also why, obviously, we put as a Q1 priority, let's update our communication channels. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Justin, too. Obviously, communication to me is just my world. So,
well, yeah, and if you go to the next slide, I think this looks at it linearly, which is appropriate. But all of these things, the year ends and a new year starts, so we think of it cyclically.
yes.
I wanted to put it in a picture that showed that. So the same 4 steps. So first, asking for feedback, and we've included some TeamSense screenshots in here to show how TeamSense might help at each of these stages. So asking for feedback, because TeamSense is a text-based platform It makes it very easy for employees to receive communication from the HR team and to send it back. As Caroline mentioned, it automatically stores and tabulates that information, so there's not a lot of paper shuffling and data entry and things that has to happen. It just happens in the platform. And then, of course, as you move to step 2 and you identify of all that great feedback, what are the things that we want to focus on? Transparency is important. So we're showing here our employee portal. You could show a summary of results from that first round of feedback on what to do for a coming year. And then based on that, you can also use more specific surveys with that structured information that I talked about earlier in the presentation to everybody, to a group of individuals whose opinion you feel are particularly important or indicative of how other people feel. And that's going to help you with that stage of getting from the 10 down to the 3 and feeling really confident that you've picked the right 3. Then defining your programs and planning, once you get that quarterly view laid out, like what Caroline just shared, you need to get ready to communicate. So in Q1, we are going to do this, and it's coming. And of course, TeamSense, a lot of people know us for communication around call off and absences, but then they understand that once that communication channel is set up, you can use it to communicate about anything. You can use it in this example. We're using open enrollment because that's something that a lot of our customers love using us for, is communicating about that. You can send out to everybody about the basics of open enrollment, and then you can send out to certain individuals who haven't submitted their enrollment on time, helping understand whether there's things that you need to do for them. And now I don't want to forget one of the key points here. We're coming to the end of the circle. Remember, step 1 was asking you for feedback. What do you want us to do as your HR team to help you feel more engaged at work? Towards the end of the year, when you're in stage 4, you have that communication to tell people what you did for them, to show the results, to show improved attendance, to show improved employee satisfaction. Whatever the results of your hard work during the year, you have that channel to communicate it. And I mentioned before, people look forward to the next year. If they had a good year and they feel like you were attentive to what they wanted and you delivered for them, they're going to stay around because they want to see that cycle continue. They're going to see what exciting things you have in store for them in the coming year.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think, again, the ease of communication makes that so much easier. Even doing things like a temperature check, right? It doesn't have to be, even your survey doesn't have to boil the ocean too, right? So I think we're coming kind of close to our end of our time. We have a couple of questions that did come in that I wanted to address real quick. While we're actually answering some of these questions, I wanted to just throw this up. So in case you want to reach out to us, if you want to talk to an expert within TeamSense, if you want to talk to a marketing expert, you got us here right now. But so a couple questions that came in. I'll let you answer this one, Justin. So can you recommend any marketing 101 books that you really like?
Oh, yeah. Read a bunch of them, but I'm thinking it's 2 of the more recent ones. At TeamSense, we really like Obviously Awesome by April Dunford, and that's about positioning specifically and product positioning. So if you think of your employee engagement programs as a product, I would check out April Dunford's Obviously Awesome. Pretty easy name to remember. And another one that I really like is one called Product-Led Growth by Wes Bush. And I like that because it really focuses on doing the obvious things first and not trying to boil the ocean with your marketing program, really getting close to the customer and letting the product sell itself. And look, if you've built a great HR program for engagement, it will sell itself. You just have to communicate about it and let it sell itself. So that's how I would say Obviously Awesome by April Dunford and Product-Led Growth by Wes Bush are good starting points. I see another question. Maybe you can take this one, Caroline.
Yeah.
What tools do you use for project management?
That's a great question. I know, because we're talking about all the project management stuff, but then it's like, okay, how do I actually get started? I've used a few different tools in my career. I think some of my top favorites would be Monday, Asana is another great one. And then I've been using Notion a lot, which is really great. They have some AI capabilities in there too that are really cool. But usually each of those tools have templates that you can utilize if you feel like you're a little bit stuck on where to get started. Really recommend taking a look at some of those templates, and they can really get you rolling, because really it just depends on your company setup and kind of how your team's set up. So that would be our recommendation. But that's all the time we have for questions. I do want to quickly plug our next week webinar. So again, we do these every Tuesday. Next week, we have an amazing customer, Emily Cockler, joining us from Riverview Industrial Wood Products. Justin's going to be leading that conversation again. So if you felt like you had a great voice for radio, join us again for next week, and you'll get to hear him talk a little bit more with Emily.
I always love speaking with customers. I learn so much from hearing the firsthand experiences of our customers and how they're using TeamSense to better connect with their employees and inspire engagement.
Yeah, it's going to be a really great one, so you don't want to miss it. But we really appreciate everybody joining us today. Thanks for taking the time out of your morning or afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
All right, take care.